Hello, Titans. Thank you for joining us at our second Drop the Mic event. Today, we have a very special guest, Alan. They are an Afro-Indigenous poet and interdisciplinary artist from Oaxaca, Mexico. Their passions include raising awareness and advocating for the LGBTQIA plus communities, as well as undocumented communities. We hope you guys enjoy this poetry session.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alan, and I am a poet and cultural worker currently based in Oakland, California. I'm originally from Oaxaca, Mexico, and I came to the United States when I was a young person, undocumented by myself. I have been working with undocumented migrants for about 10 years, going on to 11 in a few months, actually. And, working with undocumented community members is a lot of work, particularly because we all migrate from different parts of the world. And when we get to the US, it's like, oh, wow, we're here. The law targets us, the law marks us as illegal aliens. What do we do? How can we reclaim our narratives? And how can we survive and live and thrive? And as an artist, as a cultural worker, one of my main goals is to really shift the narrative of how we understand migration. And what I mean when I say that, right? And I think that what I mean is that I advocate for nuanced and complex migrant stories. I am exhausted of narratives such as migration is beautiful, because for those of us who crossed the border, our migrations were anything but beautiful. For those who were forced out of their country, their migration was anything but beautiful. For those who are refugees, political asylees, or living in exile, migration was anything but beautiful. My work also attempts to dismantle the narrative that says immigrants get the job done or immigrants are essential, because those narratives bind us to labor productivity, which is ableist, anti-Black, also transphobic, queerphobic, etc. Those narratives don't allow us to talk about pleasure, to talk about what brings us joy, to talk about the kinds of worlds we envision, or how we want the world to change and transform so that it is livable for all of us and not just some of us, particularly those in power. Um, and I have written two books that kind of deal with some of the themes that I just mentioned. My two books are titled Intergalactic Travels, Poems from a Fugitive Alien, and that collection really goes into what my life was like for the 16, 17 years that I grew up undocumented in the US, and it traces Blackness, queerness, indigeneity in complex ways. And my other collection, To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement, really leans in on romantic love, familial love, community love. And while it's centering love, it's trying to think, what can we learn from grief? And what does mourning teach us about being a better relative, about moments where we've been shitty relatives, and about the potential of relation? And today I want to read some poems to you from both of the collections and also some of my newer work. So the first poem that I want to read to you is titled Sick in America, and it chronicles my crossing, but puts it in perspective with, I would say, other communities that are not just migrant. So this is the first piece, Sick in America. Before the crossing, Our family could understand the whispers of the water. We bathed our cuerpos morenos as if we were holy, as if our humanity was valuable, as if we were worth life. It is difficult to remember anything before the crossing. How do I tell myself I had a childhood if at the age of 5 I am a fugitive of the law? It would be easier to remember life before the crossing if we didn't become paralyzed for the rest of our lives. The doctor tells me I have post-traumatic stress disorder. He says it is because I am an immigrant, but not to worry because in a few years I will be American. During the crossing, we were faced with the reality of what it means to be Black and Indian in an empire that constantly measures us on production, production, and production, our blood, a sustenance to those who deem us illegal. The water here has been cut through by wooden logs that demand we show them papers that say we are not poor, nor Indian, or Black. I only crossed once. Location, San Isidro Tijuana border. Age, 5. How? By foot and car. But every story heard becomes another crossing. My body remembers every crossing. Every crossing becomes mine in dreams. Fugitive. Runaway slave, fugitive, runaway Indian, fugitive, runaway soon-to-be lynched Negro, fugitive, Asata Shakur, fugitive, Mike Brown, fugitive, Sandra Bland. And the list continues. Crossing the precise location in a 5-year-old's life where they lose their humanity, their health, and their livelihood. The site where the child realizes their guiding spirit is weakening, the body changing, the mind confused, the flesh shivering, digits dancing, eyes watering. The site where the child is just a child, but Americans will blame the child for infecting the American dream. The site, again, where a child is just a child visiting occupied Indian land. The black body does not migrate, it is shipped. Tavianyango. American. I guess I'll be forever sick. And that was Sick in America. And the reason why I wanted to start with that piece is because it really um, tries to build coalitions with African American communities in the US, Native American communities in the US, and other migrants here because I'm tired of us only thinking about migration as an issue of those who come to the US, but migration is also an African American and Native American issue. Um, let's talk about Native American communities. They were literally forced out of their traditional homelands, and a lot of them were sent to reservations where they were meant to die. That is a forced migration brought upon by settler colonialism. And let's not forget the transatlantic slave trade, where indigenous Africans were kidnapped, transported, and enslaved in the Americas. That's another form of forced migration that is like indentured slavery, chattel slavery, that required some form of migration. Um, and I don't want us to take that lightly. Um, and when I was in the US, I didn't obviously speak English when I came. And my relationship to language has been so trippy. And I want to read a poem about language and translation. It's titled No Translation Necessary. And I'll read it in English and then I'll read it in Spanish. No translation necessary. I notice Mama Maria look at me funny every time I open mi bocota. I know it is because I lost my accent. Though gringos sometimes tell me I slur my words, Mama Maria knows that though she does not understand the language, She needs no translation, for the people that speak it are always sad. How ugly this English is. And I want to read it in Spanish. No se necesita traducción. Me doy cuenta que Mamá María me mira gracioso cada vez que abro mi bocota. Sé que es porque perdí mi acento, aunque los gringos me dicen que a veces trabo mis palabras. Mamá María sabe que aunque ella no entienda el idioma, no necesita traducción, porque la gente que lo habla siempre está triste. Qué feo es este inglés. I think that a lot of the times we don't talk about how ugly the language is. I know that a lot of other places in Latin America, they don't only speak Spanish, duh. They speak indigenous languages, Belize. They speak English as their main language. In Guyana, they speak English as the main language. In Suriname, Dutch is the main language. In Brazil, Portuguese is the main language. But there's something I feel for those of us who are non-English speakers, when we are forced to learn English in the US, there's something really ugly about it. And it's the way that the English is an everyday reminder that we were forced to leave and forced to assimilate in some ways, you know? And like in my country of birth, in Mexico, there's a lot of people that don't speak Spanish. So for them, when they have to learn Spanish, it's a reminder that Mexico is a settler colonial nation. Um, and it's hard growing up undocumented in the US. Um, and I also think that there is something really important that we don't talk about in the migrant community. And that's the fact that sometimes when one is undocumented, it is hard to prioritize romance and love. And I want us to talk about that. I think that we need to talk about romance and love, that we remind ourselves that we are allowed to have romantic relationships, that we are allowed to lean on pleasure and open up ourselves to an erotic life. I know that some folk are asexual, and that doesn't mean that they can't have relationships, right? That just means that they're asexual. And pleasure comes in many ways. And although this poem is pretty difficult for me to share, I think it's so important for me to share it. And I also want to show it to you. So that you can, if you want to read along, you can read along. I know that it's small, but actually, let me make it bigger so that you can read along and prioritize the poem. And it's written inside an immigration form. I'll read the question. Have you or any member of your family included in the application ever committed any crime and or been arrested, charged, convicted, or sentenced for any crimes in the United States? Yes. If yes, for each instance, specify in your response what occurred and the circumstances, dates, length of sentence received, location, the duration of the detention or imprisonment, reasons for the detention or conviction, any formal charges that were lodged against you or your relatives included in your application, and the reasons for release. Attach documents referring to these incidents if they are available, or any explanation of why documents are not available. And my response to this intrusive, surveilling question is the following. I met a boy when I was 19. He had a scar below his left nipple. When I asked him how he got it, he covered it with his digits and said, when I crossed. That's when I told him I loved him for crossing, loved him for living, loved him for sharing, loved him for trusting, loved him for reminding me we are human, loved him for honesty, loved him for stories, loved him for poetry. I met a boy when I was 19. He had spent 2 years, 17 days in a detention center. I swore to set the border on fire. I met a boy when I was 19. And we did immoral things. We are criminals, sir. Take me, 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 me. I feel that piece never gets easier to read, especially reading it over a laptop in front of a camera, because it's yet another reminder that our intimate lives have been stopped, have been altered by circumstances we could have never imagined, such as the circumstance of being forced to leave your country, or the circumstance of literally being kidnapped by ICE and being imprisoned in a place that is uninhabitable, a place that is inhumane, places that are not supposed to be for people to continue to live. And growing up undocumented, I was always a little bit suspect of love, and I've had to unpack that and really remind myself, no, just because the law uglifies us and attempts to control us doesn't mean we cannot lean on love. And I want to read this other poem to you, and it's in the shape of lips. I just want to read it to you. It's very brief. Illegal is to poet when the government demands and needs your silence, and illegal is to have survived again and again and still be running. And illegal is to find pleasure on the lips of another alien, and for the first time, call that living. For me, this poem is super important because I believe that my mother was my first teacher. She was the first person to really encourage my poetry, and also the first person to teach me that loving while undocumented is one of the most radical things that you can do, because it is an act of civil disobedience, it is an act of protest, and it is something that tells the state, fuck you, I am here, I am going to continue to live my life no matter what you tell me about myself. And in light of that, I want to read this poem titled 18 Notes on Love from my other collection, To Love and Mourn in the Age of Displacement. Here we go. 18 Notes on Love. I walk behind him, study his pace, check if his arms swing to the beat of his step, and scurry to catch up. I remind myself that yes, our love may not be safe, but Black and Indigenous liberation requires risk. We walk next to each other, close. On the perfect days, the tops of our hands will feel each other's warmth. A new world will begin building. 3. And we will pretend not to notice. There is a lot of pretending not to hear. 4. We will talk and laugh. 5. At bars, we pretend there is no trauma. 6. Sometimes we kiss or peck, most likely, or if the day is right, a longer kiss, but only when we can assure that the traffic lights will be our only witnesses. 7. We're gonna get hate crimed, one will joke, as queers of color usually do. 8. We will sin, and we will continue to do so often. 9. Hens will slip underneath t-shirt, and flesh will meet, devour, and offer flesh. 10. One of us will open our eyes as we kiss, and that world that started to build a while back will beget new forms of care. 11. We will stand outside, breathing hard or hardly breathing, as we examine each centimeter of pupil. 12. The optometrist says that the pupil determines how much light will enter the eye, and this moonlight is mischievous. Why does she insist on having us enter into one another's eyes? 13. After a thorough eye exam, his right hand will delicately move my locks away from my glasses and ask, 14, is it okay if we hold hands all the way tonight? 15. We will hold on for dear life. 16. Heteros will brand us as radical, but in a forever era of anti-blackness, femicides, and other settler violences, let's be precise and call it living the only way we've known how. As Black, queer, Indian, and for the first time, together. 17. Our future, it is not guaranteed here. 18. And for this reason, we create abundance where we thought there was none. I think that one of the most powerful things that we can do is not only lean on love, but also talk publicly about mourning. And I want to read this poem to you titled Mourning, the Act of Imagining and Rebuilding Home. And I wrote this piece after adjusting or being assigned legal permanent residence, which is also fake because it's like legal permanent residence. That can still get revoked from you at any moment. So it is not permanent. It is still conditional and it is still temporary. So it's titled Mourning for the Act of Imagining and Rebuilding Home. What do you do when a WhatsApp message appears and the sender is not in your phone book? And what do you do when the message says, Abuela has passed away and has already been buried? And what do you do when you cannot travel back to that country, state, pueblo, home, land, and what do you do if you do not know how to cry or ache and then cry? And what do you do when the poem does not come because the memories are not there? And how do you deal with having been undocumented for 17 years and not have said goodbye? And why can Google fucking have an answer, a diagnosis to why you do not feel the pain? And when while sitting in a dark bedroom with a laptop and Word document, stop replacing bodies? And why is it that the first time you take an interest in mezcal is 3 months after her death when you Google best mezcal in San Francisco for under $50? It's funny how I thought I could replace a body with gastronomy. Mezcal doesn't resurrect a body, and mezcal will not bring back abuela. I didn't start drinking that night. But damn right, I did drink. The label read, Nuestra Soledad, 100% agave, Oaxaca, México, bottled at origin. Funny how in this empire, liquor can travel, but the Black and indigenous body cannot. At least distributors didn't forget the accent on Mexico's E, like I forgot all the memories of my fraternal abuela. I know all the excuses, but I refuse to give absent father, former father, the power to fade all childhood memories. I finally visited my pueblo and the abuela's home. Her mother is still alive with dementia. She remembered me after 18 years of absence. I finally visited my pueblo, often reminding myself that I was no ghost or in a REM cycle. It is difficult to believe you are home when you have been displaced for so long. I finally visited my pueblo, saw photos of abuela, her ama, and her abuela. For the first time, these photos, these poems are how I recuperate home. I finally visited my pueblo and made sure I brought it with me. There is an altar as proof. I finally visited my pueblo. There is an altar as proof. There is a poem as proof. Abuela, I was shown a photograph of your abuela. She carries a medicine pouch over her neck. It was exposed on top of her típica. Did you ever ask her if it was intentional? Abuela, I was shown a photograph of your abuela. She carries a medicine pouch over her neck. Did you ever ask her what type of medicine was necessary to stand the cruelty of this world, to survive the atrocities that were yet to come? Abuela, your abuela's photo rests on the wall above my altar. Have you spent time with your abuela while visiting me? Isn't it beautiful that the three of us can reunite during Sunday evening ceremony? Abuela, there is an altar in my room, an offering to your abuela. This is how the pueblo taught me to reassemble home. Abuela, there is an altar in my room, an offering to your abuela. Are you comfortable in our home? Is there anything that you need? For me, mourning is not something that ever ends. It's more of a lifelong process. There are days where I feel an incredible sadness come out of nowhere, and instead of avoiding it, I kind of sit down and I'm kind of like, okay, where might the sadness be coming from? Is there something that I mourned too quickly, or is there something that I thought the mourning process was over to? And when I ask myself that question, I'm like, oh, maybe this is something I'm not done mourning. So I do what my mama taught me, which is to sit in my quietness and let myself cry. Let myself cry, whether it be in my room, in the bathroom, wherever necessary. And in light of like the lessons my mother taught me, I have a poem that I want to dedicate to her and to Black women everywhere, titled "A Daily Prayer for Ama and all Black women." God wears glow-in-the-dark acrylic nails. Her favorite color is obsidian black. She's lactose intolerant and is tired of femme exploitation. God buys gold hoop earrings at Dollar Tree and ain't afraid to wear eyelash extensions for 2 weeks straight, even if the package reads one time use only. God says hi to everyone the moment she boards public transit, and after she's seated, she speaks loudly into her phone while munching on hot Cheetos. God carries a plastic bag with quarters, pennies, and her passport, because she knows most of her followers ain't shit, and removal proceedings are always already a possibility. God orders $1 fries, $1 cheeseburgers, and $1 drinks at fast food restaurants because a girl be smart and a girl needs to eat, and sometimes thriving looks like surviving. God checks her eyebrows on her phone every 2 hours and licks her index finger to realign each hair particle before meeting up with the girls. God walks into Metro PCS every 3 days for water damage services because she's too often weeping onto her Android the deaths of Black girls. God has hired a personal stylist 'cause she don't know no more how to be simultaneously ready for a funeral, a court hearing, a birthday celebration, an anniversary dinner in the club, all in the same day. God has a Twitter account with 36 followers, and it's aight, because she follows 794,000 folk, and they all black femmes, and the 36 that follow her hold her so that she can hold the rest of the world. And I want to tell you a little story about that poem. That poem, I wrote it down because I was like, you know what? What if God is an undocumented black trans woman? What would her life be like in like the 21st century? And for me, that poem was more of a critical look at the way in which Black undocumented women have shaped my life and also my art practice. I am a storyteller because of Black poets like Yacelia Gratini, like Maria Lopez, like Gladys Guitao, and I really think that I don't give them recognition enough because often when one publishes books, right, it's like all that people see is the name of who published the book, but people don't see like the moments of those who held me, who offered love to me, who looked me in the eyes and said, you can be a better person than you have been, or for people who have looked you in the eyes and said, I love you. Thank you. And that poem is really trying to practice tenderness and practice imagining a future outside the one that we inherited. And in light of this, I think I might just want to read two more poems. And this piece is in the form of a text message I want to share with y'all. Even though it looks like a text message, it is a poem, okay? It is a poem. Say with me, a text message can be a poem. Um, and you know what? I'm gonna make it big so y'all can see it. Here we go. I love you lots. I think we are collectively exhausted. Sometimes I think everything that's happening is a dream we will wake up from. I love you too. I hope we are dreaming. I really hope we are. I don't want to normalize any of it, and I think I am starting to. We can't accept this reality. We have to refuse as hard as we can. But we need to hold each other to refuse. I want to learn to love better, to hold tighter. Thank you for being such an attentive audience slash witness. So this last piece that I want to share with y'all is a gift to you. I'm also excited because it's going to be an installation at a gallery. And I want to read it to you and then talk about it and give you some words of what you can do to show up for migrants in your life. And this is titled Future Story. One day, borders will be a word that we study. A word so fascinating, the future generations will try to understand, and thankfully, there will be no grammar for comprehension. Nothing will be forgotten, but borders will be unimaginable because in the future, the lack of care and commitment to each other that was necessary to oppress will be something no one has experience with. In the future, we will bring our memory. There will be many creation stories to how we got to where we are. The creation stories will be hard to tell. We will sob from the pain of betrayal, poor care, bad love, state sanctioned executions, missing and disappeared relatives, endangered languages, extinct species, and the disaster of bearing witness to it all. We will also shake with joy when we describe what it felt like when settlers realized they were the demise of relationality, when settlers begged indigenous peoples to protect the land, and when indigenous peoples made them sign papers, the same ones they've been obsessed with, stating that they gave up their citizenship to the nation, that they gave up their laws and all the land they had accumulated and mistreated. We will release tension when the storytellers get to the part where the elders and toddlers made offerings so grand to the ocean, volcanoes, mountains, and dried waterscapes that words they had never heard before started visiting them in dreams. At first, they were terrified, but when they listened closer, they realized that the whispers and song, that the words were whispers and songs, quiet, quiet tunes with instructions on how to offer and accept care, the same care that the whispers and songs were neglected, but once had experienced. None of the stories will be as easy to witness or tell. Our bodies will only bear to tell and listen to them once every couple of years, because in those moments we will meet the past in its barest state, but still we will insist on the stories. And the reason why I wanted to close with this poem is because I believe that the future is now. I believe that even though we are going through horrible situations such as children in detention centers, such as natural disasters happening week after week because of how poorly we have treated the environment, I believe that we are also constructing a future in the present. I believe that when we give ourselves permission to imagine us in other situations, that is a future in the making. I believe that when we decide to give care to each other as opposed to give care to institutions or to give care to I don't know, celebrities or to give care to politicians, when we offer care to those in our day-to-day lives, that is a future in the present. When we tell ourselves migration is not beautiful, migration is actually horrible, and nobody should ever be forced to leave their home country, that is a future in the making. When we say immigrants are more than the labor they produce for the settler conquistador nation, that is a future in the making. When we say you do not have a right to tell us who we can love, that is a future in the making. When we stand up against violence, that is a future in the making. Sometimes people think that speculative imagining is a fiction, right? No, when we tell ourselves we are worth more than the bullshit we inherited, that is us giving ourselves permission to demand for more and to expect more, as opposed to expect the same shit we've been offered, which sometimes is meritocracy, which sometimes is respectability politics, which sometimes is conditional acceptance or conditional belonging. I really hope that when we want to stand up for migrants, what we do is not lean on these really flat narratives. I hope that we are able to talk about the messiness of migrants. One of the most courageous things that we can do as a migrant community is talk about moments where we do not show up for each other. Because when we talk about those moments is when we open up space for us to practice what the Black Alliance for Just Immigration calls transformational solidarity. Transformational solidarity is when all affected people show up for one another and do not play oppression Olympics. Migrants need to work with African American communities. Migrants need to work with Native American communities. Migrants need to work with trans communities. Migrants need to work with disabled communities. Migrants need to work with people who they assume do not have a migrant experience. Because the root of the violence that migrants experience is the law. The law targets us. The law makes us ineligible for citizenship because the law says we can't imagine you to be part of this community. there's something inherently wrong about who you are that we don't want to share a social life with you. And therefore, the migrant movement needs everybody. And that means that migrant organizers need everybody. We have to stop building relationships off of how the state oppresses us. And we need to start building relationships around what is your vision for the future? What is your politic for a world outside of violence? Who are you ready to show up for? Like poet Ariana Brown says, are you ready to fight for those who you may not have loved at some point in your life? Thank you so much for this time together. I hope that these poems make you think about the world, and also make you reflect on the multidimensional lives that migrants lead on a day to day basis. And if you want to show up for migrants, remember to allow for nuanced and messy narratives about migration, and also to recognize that our struggle is about more than papers. Our struggle is about a legal system that depends on settler colonialism. And as long as settler colonialism remains in the United States and indigenous peoples are not given their land back, the fight to abolish the conditions that the migrant is going under right now will not be over until indigenous peoples are given their land back, and indigenous peoples can teach us how to be communal stewards to the land and protect the land in the same way that the land has protected us. Thank you for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much, Science, for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the poetry and had lots of fun. We hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. And to stay updated with more upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Instagram at ASICSUF to see all the virtual events that we have and we're hosting for you guys. Thank you.